Imagine being a kid, just a regular boy, with a few bucks to spend on whatever you wanted. Now what if you had the chance to use that money to make someone's day? Sounds simple enough, right? Well, for one young boy, that small, thoughtful gesture turned into something much bigger, something that would change his life forever. Meet Jake, a 10-year-old with a heart bigger than his allowance. Like any other kid his age, Jake had dreams, big dreams. He loved video games, wanted to go to the biggest theme park, and he always had a list of things he wanted to buy. But there was something different about Jake. His parents had always taught him the importance of kindness and giving back. So when he was handed his weekly allowance, he didn't just think about what he could get for himself. He thought about who might need it more. One rainy afternoon, as Jake was walking home from school, he noticed an elderly woman sitting by a coffee shop, her face downcast, hands shaking. Her clothes were old, and her shoes had seen better days. Jake had seen her around the neighborhood before, but today, something felt different. There was a sadness in her eyes that made him stop in his tracks. He had just received his weekly allowance, enough to buy a new toy or treat himself to something special. But as he looked at the woman, an unexpected feeling washed over him. Without even thinking, he walked up to her, took the crumpled bills from his pocket, and handed them to her. "Here, I think you need this more than I do," Jake said shyly, his heart racing. The woman looked at him, her face softening. She didn't say much, but her eyes sparkled with gratitude. She clasped Jake's small hand, thanking him. Jake, a little embarrassed but proud, walked away, his heart swelling with warmth. He had never done anything like this before, and it felt good. It felt right. What Jake didn't know was that this simple act of kindness would soon spark something beyond his imagination. The next few days went by like any other. Jake went to school, played with his friends, and kept busy with the usual routines. But something strange began to happen. He started noticing little changes in his life, things that he couldn't explain at first. It was almost as if the universe was somehow returning the kindness he had shown. One afternoon, as Jake was walking home from school, a sleek black car pulled up beside him. The window rolled down, and a voice called out to him, "Hey, are you Jake?" He nodded, unsure of what was going on. The man in the car introduced himself as Mr. Thompson, a local businessman who had heard about the young boy's selfless gesture. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know how anyone could have known about what he had done. He had only given away a few dollars. It didn't seem like something that would get noticed, but Mr. Thompson wasn't just there to thank him for his generosity. He was there to offer Jake something that would change his life in ways he never imagined. "Jake," Mr. Thompson said with a smile, "you don't know me, but I've been looking for someone just like you. Someone who understands the true meaning of giving. I have an opportunity for you, one that could change everything for you and your family." Jake stood frozen. The words felt like they didn't quite make sense. A chance to change everything. For a boy who had simply given away his allowance to a stranger, this sounded like something straight out of a dream. He tried to process what Mr. Thompson was saying, but it all seemed too surreal. How could this be happening to him? "What do you mean?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson chuckled. "You'll see soon enough. But for now, I need you to trust me. I want to show you something that could open doors for you, like you never thought possible." Jake's mind was racing. Was this real? What kind of offer could this man possibly have? And what did it have to do with him? Was it because of the money he'd given to the woman? Before Jake could ask any more questions, Mr. Thompson handed him a small envelope. "Take this, and you'll know what I mean." Jake was confused, but also intrigued. What was inside this envelope? Was this the opportunity Mr. Thompson had mentioned? He was too curious to walk away now, even though the weight of what was happening felt almost too much for his young shoulders. He glanced at the envelope, his hands trembling as he turned it over. There was no going back now. Just trust me, Mr. Thompson repeated, giving Jake a reassuring smile before driving off, leaving Jake standing there, still in shock. As he opened the envelope, Jake's eyes widened in disbelief. What he saw inside was something he could never have expected, something that would change everything he knew about his life. But the contents of that envelope, well, that's something. You'll have to wait to find out. So, what was in the envelope, and how would it change Jake's life forever? Stay tuned for the next part of this story, because what happens next is nothing short of extraordinary. But for now, remember this. Sometimes one small act of kindness can set off a chain of events so big, it's hard to believe. Jake's journey was just beginning. What he didn't know was that the best was yet to come. Jake stood there, the envelope still in his hand, feeling both confused and curious. His mind was racing with a million thoughts. What was inside? What kind of opportunity was Mr. Thompson talking about? He had never been in a situation like this before, and it made his stomach churn. A part of him wanted to tear the envelope open, right then and there, but another part of him felt like maybe he should wait until he was somewhere private, away from prying eyes. After a few moments of standing frozen on the sidewalk, Jake decided to take the envelope home with him. It felt like the right thing to do, but his legs were shaky, and the walk felt longer than usual. Every step he took was filled with anticipation and doubt. His thoughts kept going back to that woman, the one he had helped just days before. Was this somehow connected to her? Was the universe trying to reward him for being kind? When Jake finally got home, he went straight to his room, closed the door, and sat on his bed, staring at the envelope. His heart was pounding in his chest. He ran his fingers over the smooth surface, and for a moment, it almost felt like the envelope was alive, holding something powerful inside. He took a deep breath, ripped it open, and pulled out a single piece of paper. The note inside was brief, but chillingly clear. Meet me tomorrow at the old library at 3 p.m. Come alone. Bring the envelope. Jake stared at the paper, his fingers gripping it so tightly that the edges started to curl. What was this about? Why the old library? It wasn't the kind of place anyone would go to unless they had a very specific reason. And who would want him to come alone? His mind was spinning with questions. But the one thing that stood out the most was the cryptic message, "Bring the envelope." That meant something. Jake was sure of it. But what? Was this a prank? Or was Mr. Thompson really offering him some kind of life-changing opportunity? Jake didn't have anyone to talk to about this. He couldn't just tell his parents. They were good, hard-working people, but they wouldn't understand. They'd probably think it was some kind of scam. They'd never let him go. But Jake felt a pull, a strange sense of urgency that he couldn't explain. He needed to find out what this was about. The next morning, Jake woke up early, not even bothering to eat breakfast. His stomach was too twisted with nerves. His parents were still asleep, and he knew this would be the perfect opportunity to slip out without them noticing. The old library wasn't far, but Jake's thoughts kept racing. What if it was a trap? What if he was walking into something dangerous? He shook the thoughts from his head. He had to do this. The envelope. The meeting. It all felt too important to ignore. By 2:30 p.m., Jake was standing outside the old library, his heart pounding, louder than ever. The building was dark, almost ominous, with ivy creeping up the sides of the stone walls. It had been abandoned for years, the windows cracked and covered in grime. No one really used the library anymore. It had become more of a relic of the past, a forgotten place for most people in the neighborhood. Jake glanced around nervously, but there was no sign of Mr. Thompson. He checked his watch. It was almost 3 p.m. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, and his palms were sweaty. As the clock struck 3, the door to the library creaked open slowly, and out stepped a man dressed in a long coat. His face was hidden in the shadow of his hat, but there was something oddly familiar about him. Jake's instincts told him to turn around and run, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the way the man moved, or maybe it was the way he had that air of knowing something Jake didn't. Whatever it was, Jake stood frozen as the man approached. He didn't look like Mr. Thompson. This man was older, with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to see straight through him. He had the look of someone who had lived a long, complicated life. "You're Jake, right?" the man asked, his voice low and gravelly. Jake nodded, barely able to speak. His throat felt dry, and his words caught in his chest. The man's eyes flickered to the envelope in Jake's hand. "I see you've brought it. Good. Come with me," he said, turning and walking back into the library. Jake hesitated for a moment, but the strange pull he felt was too strong. He followed the man inside, feeling like he was crossing into a different world, one he hadn't prepared for. The interior of the library was even darker than the outside, with dust hanging in the air like a thick fog. Shelves full of old books lined the walls, their spines faded and worn. It smelled like age, like secrets, and untold stories waiting to be uncovered. The man led Jake through a narrow hallway, stopping at a heavy wooden door at the back of the building. He glanced over his shoulder. "No one knows we're here. It's just you and me." Jake's heart raced. He had no idea what he was getting into, but he had come this far. The man pushed open the door, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside was a large table with papers scattered across it, along with a few old computers and strange devices Jake didn't recognize. There was a map on the wall, and on the table was a large sealed envelope, just like the one Jake had received. The man motioned for him to sit. "Now, Jake," the man began, his voice serious. "We have a lot to discuss. You've been chosen for something very special, something that will change your life. But it's not going to be easy. Are you ready for this?" Jake nodded, but inside, his mind was reeling. What had he gotten himself into? And was he ready for what was coming next? The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was knowing, almost as if he already knew Jake's answer. Good, because once we start, there's no turning back. And just like that, everything Jake thought he knew about his world, about his life, was about to be turned upside down. The question now was, would he survive the storm that was coming? Jake sat at the table, feeling like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. The man who had led him here, the one with the deep, steady voice, was staring at him with a look that sent chills down his spine. He wasn't sure what to expect, but the tension in the room was thick, and his gut told him that whatever was coming next would change everything. "Do you understand what's happening?" the man asked, his eyes piercing. Jake shook his head, trying to keep his composure. "Not really. But you said I was chosen." "Chosen for what?" The man's face softened, but there was still a glint of something serious in his eyes. "You've been part of something bigger than you know, Jake. What you did, giving that money to the woman, wasn't just kindness. It was a test of character." Jake blinked, unsure how to process this. He hadn't done anything special. He had just given a few dollars to a stranger who needed help. But now, sitting here in this dark room with the mysterious man. It felt like everything he had ever done in his life was leading to this moment. That woman you helped. The man continued. She's not who you think she is. In fact, she's someone who has been part of a larger network. And by helping her, you've shown that you have something rare, something valuable. Jake's heart raced. What network? What are you talking about? The man finally smiled, but it was a smile with a purpose. I'm talking about a network of people who do good in the world, who go beyond ordinary acts of kindness. People who are always looking for the next person to join them, to carry on their mission. And that's where you come in, Jake. You've got the heart, the strength, and the potential to do something great. Something bigger than you ever imagined. Jake felt a rush of emotions, confusion, excitement, fear, but most of all, a sense of disbelief. This couldn't be real. A boy like him, with just a simple allowance to his name, being a part of something so important. It didn't make sense, but the man, seeing Jake's uncertainty, slid a large envelope across the table. It was sealed tightly, with a symbol Jake didn't recognize. Inside this envelope is everything you need to know. It's the start of a new path for you. If you choose to accept it. Jake stared at the envelope. His instincts screamed at him to run, to forget everything, to go home where it was safe. But then he thought back to the kindness he had shown, the look of gratitude in the woman's eyes, and the words Mr. Thompson had said. Was this the opportunity he had been waiting for? The chance to make a real difference? He took a deep breath and picked up the envelope, opening it carefully. Inside was a small card with an address and a message written in bold, simple letters. Your next step starts here. Follow the path, and you'll change more lives than you ever dreamed. The weight of the card felt heavy in his hands. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a call to action. Jake knew that his life was about to change, but he also understood that with that change came responsibility. Responsibility to keep the kindness going, to pass it on, and to do more than just live for himself. I'm ready, Jake said quietly, looking the man in the eye. The man nodded approvingly. I knew you would be. You've got what it takes. With that, the man stood up and motioned for Jake to follow him. As they walked out of the library, Jake felt a strange sense of peace. The questions, the fear, the uncertainty, everything seemed to fade away as he focused on what lay ahead. The journey was just beginning. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Jake started traveling, meeting new people, and taking part in projects that helped others in ways he never imagined. From building homes for families in need to organizing local events that supported children's education, he was becoming a part of something much larger than himself. But the real twist came when he received a letter one day, months later, that revealed a deeper secret, one that tied everything together. The woman he had helped, the one who had seemed so ordinary, was a key figure in a global network of philanthropists. Philanthropists who had been watching for someone with Jake's heart and potential. They had been watching him for months, and it turned out that Jake had been unknowingly tested in ways no one could have guessed. What he had thought was a simple act of kindness had, in fact, been the start of a journey into a world of extraordinary people who made a true difference. And what was most surprising of all was that the kindness Jake had shown wasn't just something that had earned him a place in this network. It had set him on a path to lead others, to inspire others to give, to help, and to change lives for the better. Jake had no idea where his journey would lead next. But one thing was clear. Everything he had done, everything he had given, had come full circle. The life-changing gift he had received wasn't something material. It was the chance to make a lasting impact, to live a life of purpose, and to be part of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. And as Jake looked at the world around him, he realized that the greatest gift of all wasn't the opportunities or the recognition. It was the realization that every small act of kindness could have the power to change the world. Jake had found his place in it. Sometimes all it takes is one simple choice, one small act of kindness to set everything in motion. And for Jake, that moment had led to a future brighter than he could have ever dreamed. The end was only the beginning.